I'm making that as well.
Okay. Well, if not, I'll figure it out. I just make it up as I go along or something. It's anyway. I'll wait 30 seconds maybe.
Yeah, just give me a sec.
If it's a problem, don't worry about it. I'll figure it out.
Done.
All right. Toda. Hazan, thank you so much.
You.
All right. Love being introduced by you. Have a good one and good to see you. So, good evening, everyone, or good night, or whatever it is, wherever you are. Coming to our third and final part of this journey of Bible criticism into the Orthodox world. And obviously, it has seeped in by the simple fact that we're actually sitting here and discussing it is obviously proof that it's here somehow. But it also represented a threat. And the issue to me, uh, looking at it through no other lens except history, when you look at Jewish history, maybe in a very general way, and maybe even in a very close, focused way, you see the following. You see that when our religion, Judaism, Yahadut, Yiddishkeit, whatever you want to call it, is threatened by outside forces. And I don't mean physical forces. Physical forces you deal with X, Y, and Z, but spiritual threats. And, let's go to what we call the biblical period, when idol worship and polytheism dominates the ancient Near East. There are people, individuals, and maybe more than individuals, who stand up and devise ways of proving idol worship not the correct thing to do. And it was a huge battle. So Judaism, and I'll say it as a line, is constantly in battle. It is always, and I'll use the Hebrew word milchama, there is and will be in every phase of Jewish history some kind of a threat, sometimes both physical threat, and surely a spiritual threat. But, and here's the but, if you look at, and let's go on, think of Hellenism. Hellenism arrives. So you have all these different modalities of how to deal with Hellenism. Do I adopt it totally and leave Torah? Do I reject it totally and stay isolated and far from its influence? Or do I look at it and see if it has what's the word I'm looking for? Something beneficial for me as a Jew. And that I might adapt and incorporate. And that's what we've basically done. We have come to this period in history today where if you strip away certain things we teach, the way we teach, certain ideas, you can trace some of them to influences of different cultures, et cetera, et cetera. And, somebody wants that kind of a lecture one day, kol hakavod. We could do that. The fact that the Talmud is peppered with hundreds of Greek words, right there is proof. I mean, the greatest proof to me from that world of just proving the power of words and the adaptability of words is look at the word Sanhedrin. It's not a Hebrew word. The Rambam hardly in his Mishneh Torah will speak of the Bet Din Hagadol Shebirushalayim, the Supreme Court of the Jewish people. At the end of the day, it's a Sanhedrin, a Greek word. There's all Masechet Sanhedrin. It comes from what eventually becomes the English word Senate. It's out there. We look at it, we use it, it has a purpose, I adopt it. A very power of adaptation, it's only a word, but there are more serious examples. And of course, let's leave that alone for a while, but just go to the larger threats. In the early medieval period, when the Karaite movement arises that threatens rabbinic Judaism and the oral law, great people, great people. Here's the difference. Rav Sadia Gaon, even the Rambam, I say even the Rambam because that was not his main concern, but for Sadia it was. Literally everything Rav Sadia touched was somehow an aim, an explosion aimed at the Karaite movement because he felt it was a threat. And I will argue with them on their own terms, namely from the written text, never quoting a Chazal when he argues with them. The greatness of Rav Sadia is his ability to find psukim to prove his point of view. Let me share one that might be, wait a second, he's going against what the Talmud says. Friday night, or I should say Friday night, but Erev Friday night, women have a mitzvah to light candles. It's clearly a rabbinic creation. The rabbis, it's the Rabbanon, as they say in yeshiva language. Rav Sadia wrote a tiny book called Ner Shabbat, where from Psukim, he proved that lighting candles, Erev Shabbat, Lichvot Shabbat, was a mitzvah d'oraita, a biblical one. Now, why is he doing that? Simple. And you might disagree with him halachically and with the terminology, but part of what Rav Sadia was doing is taking on the challenge and responding. The Chacham Hador, the great Rav Sadia Gaon. So anytime there's a threat, you see great people, great Rishonim, standing up. When Greek philosophy to some people felt to be a threat, they got up and argued with it. Yehuda Halevi's Kuzari is clearly a polemic against a whole bunch of things. So people sat down and composed things to teach everyone else. Not that long ago, or to the 1900s, the biggest threat was not Bible criticism. As we go through the entire 1900s, the biggest threat to religion in general, and Judaism in particular, was science. Science began to question many assumptions that we make in religion in general. And if you remember, especially in the 60s, 70s, a little bit into the 80s, not so much into the 90s, but it continued. Great people, including the Lubavitcher Rebbe, took on some of these threats and composed essay, minor or major ones, in a book called Actually Challenge. You might still find it out there. Somebody might even own it. It's, I would say, totally almost outdated by now. But okay, people rose to the occasion. Now, Bible criticism comes along, and the great people have not yet responded. And I'll come to that eventually as we close this up and say, you'll see my point of departure when we end the lecture. But let's go back to where we left you off. I quickly, because we were pretty much strapped for time, jump to Kasuto, and I'll come back to Kasuto. But let's go back to the medieval period. The Sochnai Masar, it's already a code word for certain passages that maybe, according to Ibn Ezra, maybe it's more than maybe, Moshe himself did not compose, but were added in by someone else, Yoshua, clearly with the caveat of b'nevuah, with prophecy. This is not someone adding in a word with absolutely no prophecy. It's God. Now, clearly that presents a separate challenge, but let's leave that challenge. Maybe we'll discuss it briefly when we speak of some of the arguments that were made against the Rambam's eighth principle, etc., or showed some weaknesses in it. But the question is, were there other Rishonim? Were there other great people that whose books we study, whose books we quote, that intimated such points? And one of them actually comes to surface in a very interesting debate that many of you might actually remember in 1975/1976, and it doesn't become popular until a couple of years later, when the third volume of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's Igrot Moshe, or the Igros Moshe, are published. There, I think it was question Sheila Kuf Yud Dalet or Kuf Ted Zion or Kuf Yud Zion, is regarding this particular book. Okay, I'll put it close and you could see it. It's the Perushei Torah of Rabbi Yehuda Hasid. Rabbi Yehuda Hasid is born in the second half of the 1100s, roughly around 1150. Lives to the early 1200s, clearly considered one of the Tosafists, the teacher of some great Chachamim, including the Or Zorua, maybe according to some even Rabbi Moshe of Kusi, and obviously the great Elazar of Rokeach, the great Baal Rokeach, also both halachist and a mystic. And Rabbi Yehuda Hasid is basically known for his Sefer Hasidim. Someone by the name of Lange in Switzerland wants to publish it. And now I'll share with you the untold story that does not appear anywhere. A different fellow also wanted to publish the book. And he heard that this, and I won't mention the name, that this fellow, Lange, who had published a number of Rishonim, very important ones, a very talented person, was able to read manuscripts well, annotate them, wants to issue it. So what happens? What happens is plain and simple, and sadly, this could be a whole different lecture, how when you have an amazing manuscript and someone else might have another manuscript or has the same one, and he also was working at it, and suddenly here's someone else wants to bring it to print. Well, what do you mean? I'm working on it. So let's find some way to stop him. Now, this fellow who wanted to stop him basically said, just left out like a missive one out, that he's about to publish this work that has in it apikorsus, code word for heretical ideas. What was the heretical ideas? And there's three of them in there. I'll only mention one, which is that Rabbi Yehuda Hasid claims that the Shir HaBe'er, which is found in Tehillim. The Shir HaBe'er in Tehillim, what are you saying? Well, the famous Hodul Hashem Ki Tov Ki Le'olam Chasdel, that entire Mizmor of Tehillim, was actually composed by who and when? Wait a second. What happened? Kuf Yud Chet in Tehillim was a part of the Torah, says Rabbi Yehuda Hasid. But David HaMelech took it out and put it in Tehillim. Or the better version is that actually David HaMelech composed it and whatever it just said. The whole commentary is extremely a little bit troubling, but it would assume some later edition of something. And he's got two more passages like that with different passages. Anyway, Ramosha was against it. The fellow eventually published it. He took out those sections. They're available online on the uncensored editions. But Rabbi Yehuda Hasid had no issue, similar to Ibn Ezra, of certain things in Torah not written by Moshe, or anywhere within Tanakh. Be that as it may, so now I have two people thinking like that. And interestingly enough, one of the Tosafist collections, known as the Moshav Zakanim, some of you might be familiar with the fact that the Tosafists wrote, actually in manuscript form, do I have it here? There are in manuscript form today 150 something manuscripts of Tosafists to the Talmud. Some have not yet been published. Some have been culled through and pieces were published. You might see a collection of like 16, 17 volumes called Tosfos HaShalem that goes in the order of the Torah. I don't know where they reached, but they stopped, which basically began to cull through some of these manuscripts and picked up interesting pieces. On the pasuk where Ibn Ezra said and quoted the Yitzchak Hamavhil, if you remember, about the list of the Edomite kings, which clearly seems to be speaking of a time period before the Jews have a king, and why is there even a discussion in Bereshit? And here's a list of these kings, implying that it's from a later time period. Well, they quote Rashbam himself. The Moshav Zakanim quotes Rashbam as saying that that was written in the days of the Shoftim. So here's Rashbam claiming that that part of Bereshit was written, not clear by who, it's not clarified, but that was written in the days of the Shoftim. Prophecy still exists. About 20 years ago, a great German rabbinic scholar by the name of Tosh Shema, who obviously took an interesting name because he didn't like his Hebrew name when he moved to Israel, which is what many scholars do. So he called himself Tosh Shema, who did great work, decided to research and find more. And he wrote an article called, and anybody wants it, I can email it to you, Bikoret HaMikra v'Chachmei Ashkenaz. Bikoret HaMikra v'Chachmei Ashkenaz. In translation, biblical criticism and the early sages of the Ashkenazic French community. And he discovered there were others. Rabbeinu Avigdor from Vienna, Rabbi Shmuel HaTzarfati. In other words, Ibn Ezra is not alone when he states that. And the interesting point is that none of them had any problem of attributing to such a belief any issue. In fact, one of the things that led Rabbi Moshe Feinstein to rewrite a second responsa is that the very words of Rabbi Yehuda Hasid, which seem to be heretical, basically by implying that Moshe had written it and maybe David took it out from whichever way you want to understand it, was actually quoted in the later 1200s, early 1300s by one of the great Rishonim called Menachem Tzioni. So the person who is told, don't publish as, said Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, because it's heretical. I can't believe that he actually wrote those words and that those words were added by some mistaken student, which is always what we say, a Talmid To'eh. It was Mosif this in the commentary. Now has to retract that a little bit because one of the great Rishonim actually quotes that very quotation from Rabbi Yehuda Hasid. So there is Menachem Tzioni. And there are a few others. Point is that no one raised an issue about them. And these views were out there and oft quoted. Why is that? Well, was the Rambam's eighth principle already accepted or known, or did they even care, or had their own set of beliefs, or they had a very different view of how Torah is to be viewed? And obviously, and this is not the place and time to explain it, but if anybody's interested from a Kabbalistic point of view, things like this do not represent an issue. Okay, the concept of a supernal Torah and a primordial Torah and how it unveils itself And I'll say just that little bit, maybe it makes sense to some people. If not, that's okay too. And therefore, these views were out there. So it's not lonely Ibn Ezra being attacked if we suddenly have an issue. It's a whole bunch of people. And these were good, famous people who were Shomrei Torah mitzvot, who clearly respected halacha, who actually wrote other books that are clearly halachic, halachic in nature. Putting that aside, let's come to the 1900s. And let me share the screen with you, and I'll make this very quick. And some of you might actually remember this from a different lecture, and that is okay. This is what you should be seeing on your screen. Rayot Machriot Neged Velhuizen. That's clear, strong, weighty proofs against Wellhausen by none other than Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman, who is Rosh at this point of the Midrash of Rabbanim in Berlin. So here's the great David Tzvi Hoffman, whom we discussed in our, as we came to modern Orthodoxy, who again, if you might remember, went to the first Moetzet Gedolei Torah, representing, he was the Yoshev Rosh for a number of sessions. Here is the great David Tzvi Hoffman, a Gadol Hador, who stepped in, and what did he do? He stepped in and took to task the idea of Wellhausen. He was not afraid. He didn't say, you can't look at it. Here I am, a rabbinic leader in Germany, and in the late 1800s, early 1900s, this was like a huge issue. Rav Hoffman passed away in 1921. These were issues that Jews wanted to be on top of. Very important, the latest discovery. Every university was beginning to offer courses. And yes, to use the vernacular, people were going off the derech. Part of what the great Rav Hirsch was trying to stem with his 19 letters of Ben Uziel. Rav Hoffman, on the other hand, feels as a great scholar, and I put the words great in there, as a scholar who clearly believes in Torah being perfect, that I have to defend it. So here you have a direct attack. And he obviously has to know Wellhausen very well to go and argue with him. And he does. Okay, are they all something everyone would accept? And are they all one that Bible critics will say, oh, that's a separate issue? But these are really great, strong arguments that begin to undermine Wellhausen. By the way, the book is available on Hebrew Books. It's not a huge book. It's about 160 some pages. If you really want to struggle through it, I totally invite you to do that. And almost contemporaneous with Rav Hoffman, and I'll go back now, is Cassuto. Umberto Cassuto, who passed away in 1941 or thereabout. He wrote a book initially in Hebrew, and I showed it to you last week. And if you don't have it, just reading Joshua Berman's introduction is worth it. It really is. Now, Umberto Cassuto gave a number of lectures, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I'll make it fast, where he went to the core of the main arguments of Bible criticism. To give you two of them, one is, if you remember, the actual JEPD. The J represented the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Hashem's holy name. And any part of Torah that had the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei came from the E document. And of course, anything with, from the J document. If it had the word Elokim, it came from the E document. So the different names of Hashem caused a confusion I'll put it that way, um, to Bible critics. Why would God have two names? Maybe God should only have one name. Why is this name used here, this one used here? Oh, so maybe in different localities, different people, different sources. So everything came from this document, and everything with this E came from this one, this from. So he delivered a number of lectures, some on the divine names of Hashem, particularly Elohim and the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Brilliant, brilliant lectures where he went through dozens and dozens of psukim in Tanakh and began to realize that each one has a very particular setting and purpose. Now, having a good Jewish education, immediately you'll say, oh, one is Midat Hadin and one is Midat Harachamim. That's not what he does, which might also help you understand some of these usages of names. And of course, when they're together, then of course, Bible critics had a hard time, and that developed into, oh, there was the J1 document, and then it was amended to become, there's a J2 that was inserted into J1. And Bible criticism just began to like break it apart more and more and more, which basically is what caused its collapse at some point too. It was like this high criticism had gone so far that almost nothing really could only be traced to one pure source. And now you'd have to have not one redactor or two redactors or four redactors. You're ending up with dozens and dozens of redactors. That already begged like a serious intervention. So Kasuto then went on to the doublets. The doublets are the stories that are in Tanakh twice, or maybe thrice. And there are differences between them. So wait a second, how could you have the same story, the same mitzvah, if you want, with two different types of details? Oh, it must be that from different sources. And here we really got extremely thorny with Bible critics, because most of those either were already in the J document, so that began to like break that up a little bit, and some were, one clear discrepancy is mitzvot mentioned in Varim and mitzvot mentioned in Shemot, let's say. And like, wait a second, there are differences here, and why? To give you a famous one, look at the laws of Evet Ivri in the places where you find them. A little bit different. One speaks of Yovel, one speaks Ad Olam, which causes an issue. Now, in parentheses, I should say what I said all the way in the beginning a little bit. Many of the questions that arise in Bible criticisms, not all of them, many of them, the Rishonim and Chazal, clearly in the Gemara, especially with halachic issues. Let's remember that Torah clearly says, and we read this like clear, Torah is read in public. How many days do I eat matzah? Is it 6 days? Is it 7 days? Is it 1 day? So wait a second, Torah seems to be contradicting in just giving me this mitzvah of eating matzah. Chazal resolve it. So all these contradictions, the rabbis, again, most of them, resolved. Bible critics are not doing that. They're not interested in all that stuff, and they wouldn't even accept it. That's just a rabbinic whatever to work things out, a rabbinic device to make it fit. But Kasuto, when he went through these stories, showed how each one reveals something very different. Now, a very important one, and I'll give it in short, and we'll come to it soon, is Parak Aleph and Parak Bet of Bereshit. Parak Aleph speaks of creation. Parak Bet, Ve'ele toldot hashamayim va'aretz b'yom baram b'yom asod Hashem Elokim eretz v'shamayim, the order is switched, begins to tell a little bit of creation. It seems to be a new account of creation. And there, the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is used. In the first parak, it's only Elokim. So wait a second. There are two accounts of creation. If there are two accounts of creation, let's look deeper and we find contradictions. For example, in Parak Aleph, Vayivra Elokim et Ha'adam, God creates Adam, B'Tselem Elokim, bara otam, zachar unekeva bara otam. It seems that male and female are created simultaneously. In the second chapter of Bereshit, it seems to be a very different creation because Adam is alone, and now Adam is naming animals. He realizes they all have mates. He's stuck with that one. He needs a mate. Lo matzah eze konegdo. God puts him to sleep, and surgery gets a rib, and we have a female. So wait a second. That wasn't in the first story. So Bible critics separated those two and said, oh, Genesis 1, Genesis 2, two different accounts of creation. The editor, the final editor might have been, just took this story and just haphazardly threw this in here. Now, the Rishonim, of course, immediately, Rashi solves the problem in the most amazing way that people don't even realize. Rashi, the minute he sees the names Hashem Elokim together, but the word Elokim was used, basically says something to the effect that initially Hashem wanted to create the world only with Midat Hadin, but he realized it wouldn't work. Therefore, Shatfa Ima, he was Mishtatef Ima, he put into it also Hashem Elokim, Midat Hadin, together with Midat HaRachamim. In other words, that first creation story is the initial plan of what Hashem wanted to do. The actual creation is in Parak Bet, and Rashi solves it without getting at all involved in any critical issues. Rashbam solves it by using the famous rule, and Rashi also slightly uses it, Klal and Prat, which is chapter 1 is a very general introduction to creation. The details of that creation don't come up until the second chapter. So these are the types of things that Kasuta was doing. And he wrote the book in Hebrew. It was translated into many languages and people began to read it. Kasuta went on to write a great commentary to all of Tanakh in Hebrew, the Kasuta Tanakh, et cetera, et cetera. So that was his contribution. Okay, and it's definitely worthwhile reading because some of the things that he said carry a tremendous amount of weight. Now, I'll skip on as we move on through the 1900s, and I'll show you a great book in case you really want to read it. It's called A Vindication of Judaism, the Polemics of the Hertz Chumash. Rabbi Joseph Hirsch, who was chief rabbi of England. And here is the great Hertz Chumash, which I mentioned all the way in the beginning. It used to be in all the pews in all the shuls until Art Scroll replaced it. And these were just thrown out. Do any of you remember them? Just give me a thumbs up if you do. Or you actually own them. Rabbi Hertz sat down and clearly, I'll just give you an idea, okay? In Bereshit alone, for example, right? A long commentaries, he makes his comments that will always deal with scientific discoveries, with archaeology. He does not ignore anything at all. And like I said to you last time, someone wants to update this. So if you go to the end of each of the Chumashim, for example, at the end of Bereshit, he has the deluge, which speaks of Noah and the flood, obviously, and its Babylonian parallel, namely the story in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So he's aware of that, and he deals with it. Then excursus F, are there two conflicting accounts of creation? okay, and maybe two conflicting accounts of the Mabul. He deals with that. Don't forget, in one pasuk with the Mabul, we're told that he should bring two animals, two pairs. The other one speaks of seven. Like, is that a different account, or is there a way to begin to do that? At the end of Sefer Shemot, for example, in one of the he speaks of Hammurabi's code of law, which precedes Torah, and its comparison. But more important, there he speaks of the Exodus. For example, he has a whole discourse on does Exodus support the higher critical theory and trying to date who the Pharaoh was. So Rabbi Hertz, sitting in England, chief rabbi, sees what's going on in his generation and decides to publish his Chumash, which became extremely popular. Sansino published it, and it flooded the Orthodox world, and Jews lived with that book, and they read that book. And you know what? Okay, I have an issue. Just check out Rabbi Hertz's Chumash, and that clearly began to solve problems. Now, again, will you find weaknesses? Is he outdated? Well, that's okay. That's all normal. Everything gets outdated. Will there be Zoom in 25 years from now? Will the world be run by AI? Will anybody give a lecture? I can tell you today, it is not difficult. And some of my students have showed me ways where you could actually create Rabbi Lieberman giving a lecture. It can be done. So instead of me being live, okay, it absolutely, okay, just put in what you need to know, have a very powerful AI chat, whatever you want to call it, like a chat GPT to the 10th power. And lo and behold, with my voice, an hour lecture about any topic in history, even things I know nothing about. I could be giving a lecture on astrophysics with the latest theories, and there I am. It's my voice. It's me. It looks like me. Okay. What will be in the future? Who knows? But each one of these people deals with the issue of their time, and they took it seriously. There was a deep care to save Judaism from any threat, and therefore they pretty much stepped up to the plate. One such person was Louis Jacobs. And I pick up the second book he wrote because what happened to Louis Jacobs is a very interesting story. He had written a book in the mid-50s, maybe a drop in the mid-50s, called We Have Reason to Believe. He was at that point a rabbi of one of the shuls in England, and he was teaching at Jews College, which would be the equivalent of Yeshiva University in England. It was a traditional school. There were classical classes in Talmud and Halakha and all that. Secular studies. Every rabbi in England had to go through Jews College to become, etc. I see there's people here who clearly know what Jews College is and have maybe fond memories of it. And lo and behold, he teaches there. Well, he writes this book. Okay, it goes out. Now, what was in this book? We have reason to believe. He began to say, look, we have an issue here with the concept of Torah min hashamayim. Biblical criticism has some solid, interesting points of view, and we need to figure out how to work with them. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, and they're right, maybe. And therefore, we'll stay faithful Jews, and Torah has to still have its divine layers, but I could accept this and try to figure this out. Fast forward a couple of years later, early 60s, I believe like 61 maybe exactly, or thereabout, there was an opening of who should run Jews College. Now, Louis Jacobs, and you can find he has his website. I think all his lectures are up there. You can hear him speak and lecture and get interviewed, and his books are up there. His followers that put it up a while ago. He died in 2007, I believe. And there's Louis Jacobs applying for this job. And he seemed to clearly be a shoo-in, a genius. Here's a Rav if you want, and therefore very popular, a great teacher, clarity, an expert in Hasidus, an expert in, I mean, he's written so many great books. For example, he wrote a introduction and a translation of Rabbi Moshe Cordovero's Toma Devora. Fabulous and probably the best translation, and the introduction explaining this great Kabbalistic work, Toma Devora. And these books are out there, but he's applying for the job. Chief Rabbi of England at that time was Rabbi Brody, Israel Brody, who opposed it. And to make a long story short, which became a cause célèbre of England Jury and the Jewish Chronicle, which is all online. You can see all the issues from their infancy. One of the great, great Jewish publications in the world all the time, including to today. The Jewish Chronicle really got involved and investigative reporting, like why is he not getting the job? And Rabbi Brody has to be involved. And so he decided to write a second book. Needless to say, he didn't get the job. And then he was actually not even allowed to be the rabbi of the shul anymore. And he had to, well, he had enough followers that he started his own shul, still Orthodox, but not part of what in England is known, not in the United States, because in the United States it's conservative, the United Synagogue. And therefore, suddenly, okay, he's out there and gone. But in this book, he tells the entire story of what happened. And clearly, and again, here is a person who believed in daven 3 times a day, very faithful, kept to halacha, did not want to reject the divinity of Torah, but wanted to figure out a way to make all this work somehow. And he's got ways of doing it. If you want to read about them, you can. After that comes an amazing human being, not a gadol hador, but a gadol in his own right, who you might know his Pirkei Bereshit. If you don't have it, it's 2 volumes. It's in Hebrew. It pays struggling through it. Or his Pirkei Moadot, or even simpler, it is what in Hebrew was called the Shitot HaBechinot. Rabbi Mordechai Breuer, who taught at Mechlala for many years, who was one of the great biblical scholars, who's responsible for this great Tanakh known as Breuer's Tanakh, a person whose reliability as a halachic Jew cannot be questioned and never was. Rabbi Mordechai Breuer, not to be confused with his first cousin, also Mordechai Breuer, who they passed away closely, also around 2007, 8, or something like that, who was a Jewish historian at Bar Ilan. Mordechai Breuer taught Tanakh in Israel, edited the Masorah of Tanakh, wrote the Tanakh. He edited what is the most accurate version of Tanakh based on all the Masorah codices, especially the Ben Asher, Keter Aram Tzova. Hundreds of articles. I can tell you that I was humbled by the fact that many years ago, when I was at a World Congress of Jewish Studies in Yerushalayim, I actually delivered a lecture there about Minchat Shai, the great Norzi, who wrote the great Masoretic commentary. He was in the audience, and I spoke to him afterwards, and he did make one correction to what I said, which of course I thanked him for. But here's this great person who had hundreds of students in Israel, who decides, and this is what makes him beautiful, he totally accepted Bible criticism, but not in the way you're thinking. And there are dozens and dozens of students today who have followed in his footsteps. Many who are great rabbanim in Israel, who understand Tanakh this way, which is what? The Torah is a multi-voice book. God does not speak human language, and neither do we get approached by God in one monotonous point of view. God needs to reveal to us a multiplicity of ideas in the concept of Dibrat Torah B'Lashon B'nei Adam. And therefore, the book is divine. There are no 100 editors or 200 or even 4. The division that these biblical scholars came up with is one that you actually, he believes, you could see. And it's something to think about. And he accepts it. Except it is God who's speaking in the entire Torah from beginning to end. And it's your job to figure out what exactly God means in each one of these narratives or mitzvot and what the change implies. Now, it's a difficult thing to do, and Rav Breuer does it very well. Many Chachamim in Israel today will use some of these methodologies. You might be familiar with the name of Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun, Rav Sherlau, who clearly have adopted this methodology. One great scholar is Lior Gottlieb. You can Google and see some of his studies. And what that created, what Rabbi Mordechai Breuer's derech of accepting it, but it's God speaking to us in different voices. God has to address us in different voices because he wants to make different points, wants to teach us different lessons. If you go through an entire piece, and if anybody wants to okay, we'll have a lecture on one part, take one idea of Rav Breuer and one whatever, just let me know and we'll arrange it, where by the time you're done, you walk away enriched. Wow. In other words, if you use this methodology, and Rabbi Breuer wrote about it, and he was criticized, he became the subject of modern scholarship in the study of Torah, edited by Shalom Karmi, where he contributed an essay explaining, defended himself against arguments that great people made against him. He has a great article in here. All these articles and other scholars who agreed and disagreed with him engaged him. He responded respectfully to all of them and defended his point of view without giving you names. So Rabbi Mordechai Breuer, not the Gadol Hador, a teacher of Tanakh who took his Tanakh seriously. Let's also remember that he comes from the tradition of Rav Hirsch, where you embrace science, you embrace the latest theories, and therefore you figure it out and you do it. And he did. So if anyone has okay, I want to really not give up on my beliefs, I want to still maintain Torah min hashamayim, and I really want this to discover the amount of chidushim you will uncover. It's wow, I never realized this, and I never realized this. His methodology is almost astounding in a certain way, to allow Bible criticism, accept it, but turn it almost around. It's God. And of course, his long introductions of how this works, and it has to be on the level of pshat, because et cetera, that's his great contribution. And therefore, Zichrono Livracha, he was a person who stepped up, made a contribution. Now, we discussed a while back the machloket of Rabbi Irving Yitz Greenberg and Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein in the 60s, and this book called Yitz Greenberg and Modern Orthodoxy, A Road Not Taken. Because in the end, modern Orthodoxy and its theology followed more Rav Lichtenstein than Rabbi Greenberg, who, B'li Ayin Hara, is at 91. He recently wrote a book called The Triumphs of Life. It just came out. It's a fabulous read. I haven't read it yet, but just from people who I know, who I trust, told me it's worth reading. Who has his ideas. He felt already in the 60s when he was teaching at Yeshiva University that Bible criticism to some degree should be out there and should be studied. Rav Lichtenstein basically disagreed. Now, you might remember, and I'll just do this very fast, let's look at some of the names I wrote down. James Kugel. James Kugel became extremely famous. He lectured in some of our shuls across this country, who taught at Harvard in the late 1900s, late 1990s and early 2000s. He had the most popular class at Harvard, the Bible, Introduction to the Bible. You couldn't get into that class. And James Kugel, whose real name is Kaduri, teaches at Bar Ilan now, or maybe he just retired from Bar Ilan, is clearly a person who accepted Bible criticism, yet has remained Orthodox. He never, ever explained exactly how this works. People have tried to interview him. He never made it very clear, but I can tell you, I'll give you my shot in the way James Kugel works, which is you can look at Torah in two ways. One is in a traditional way, which he accepts and practices and never deviated. But you could also look at Torah from what he calls, or he would call it that, a historical point of view. This book has a history. Okay, is it as crazy as the higher criticism? Is it what eventually becomes known as the lower criticism, where we look at literary devices and break different things up differently, but that a human hand had a hand in it? He believes that too. So he was like, one article called him the professor of disbelief, not of Bible. People were actually told, yeshiva fellows in the late 1990s attending Harvard were told not to go to Kugel's class. There are other better people there. Yet he remained popular. I believe he spoke in one of the shuls here long before I was in this part of the world. Similarly, you might have become familiar with the name of Tamar Ross. Baruch Hashem too, she's still alive, and Hashem should give her many long, productive years. And I believe she still teaches at Midrash Lindenbaum, also at Bar Ilan. She's accepted it with a different understanding that the book is divine and will remain divine. But she has adopted Rav Kook's point of view, which is that science and Bible criticism is science of the way scientists of the Bible have approached it. But it remains a divine document, and therefore, following Rav Kook, there are science and religion cannot really contradict. If you see a contradiction, you're lacking something. She developed this idea of a continuous revelation. Torah has not, and based on Rav Kook, Torah has not yet finished to unravel itself and reveal all its secrets. And she has written all around. You can find her articles online, and she's out there. Now, we began the class, if you remember, by reading the RCA statement that put the website, The Torah, both T's of The Torah and Torah capitalized.com. She has an article there about Orthodoxy and Bible criticism. And if you go to that website and just look at the members who contribute, you'll find a mix of non-Jews who are writing about the Bible, nothing to do with Bible criticism, but just are writing about the Bible every week for whatever the parsha is. Now, these were three religious fellows whose name I need not mention, you can Google it and find out, who were so affected, all of them with a yeshiva background, traditional background, knowing nothing, literally, of Bible criticism. And then in college, through a conversation, having nothing at all. What do I do with this? And they struggle with their faith, etc., etc. So they decide, with a lot of help, they put up this website, which by now, even though it was put in Cherem, some amazing people have contributed. Just go see it, the names. Some very important rabbis, who some of you will recognize immediately, have contributed there. And you know what? You can see that one of the entire sections running, the entire running thread of this website are people who write openly and sometimes very poignantly about their struggles in trying to figure all this out, and pretty serious. One book that came out last year by a fellow, Daniel Ross Goodman, interesting book. Notice the title, Soloveitchik's Children. Irving Greenberg, David Hartman, and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and I put the word rabbi in there, and the future of Jewish theology in America. He deals slightly with what we call the approach of Rabbi Soloveitchik to Bible criticism. Now, I have it somewhere. Let me see if I can actually share it with you. Actually, you know what? Let me not waste time because I see that we'll be out of time soon. Rabbi Soloveitchik, in one of his early books, The Lonely Man of Faith, on page 7, basically says, look, where he actually speaks of the two accounts of Bereshit, he comes up with this concept of Adam 1 and Adam 2, two Torahs describing two different people, which, by the way, in parentheses, Philo already spoke about this. Kabbalah and the Zohar had the idea of the first parak is Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, but that's a whole different discussion. But Rabbi Soloveitchik says in passing that science contradictions in Torah don't bother me. I'm not really worried about them, even though they're real. And another issue, and then he says, and Bible criticism, I don't worry about it. And then he says the following: granted, these are serious existential issues, and they're out there and they're real. It's almost like saying it is good to live with religious anxiety. You know what? At the end of the day, live with it. Now, the one book which I have 1 minute to tell you to read, and the best book, is the Ani Mammon of Dr. Joshua Berman. Buy it, read it slowly, annotated, and you'll begin to see a serious scholar who is not threatened by it, who has shown that there's a bias in the scholarly world against people who actually argue against Bible criticism. Yet he went ahead using scholarly tools to put them in a new perspective. One amazing argument that he makes, but he proves it, which was already intimated by so many, but no one said it. When we approach a book today, we approach a book, all of us, you read a book, okay? Let's say it's one author for sure, Moby Dick, right? Melville. Can you find contradictions in that book? Can you find different styles of writing in that book? Put the book through a computer and let it analyze the text. And you might find, but that's my point. He doesn't make that point. His point is we approach books. If something is repeated, why is the author repeating it? Well, many books do repeat themselves. But we approach books with a Western civilization approach. where we expect books to be straight, we expect books to be in order, we expect books not to contradict themselves. So Dr. Berman, Rabbi Berman, if you want, in this book shows you that in the ancient Near East, all books, some documents written by Ramses, same document written by Ramses II, 3 times contradicts itself and are different. Laws promulgated in the ancient Near East by the same power at the end contradict, because the style of writing in that part of the world at that particular time period cannot be approached with the Western standard. The Western standard of questioning will lead to issues. And he goes on to discuss the Rambam's 8th principle of faith, and looking closely at it through a whole bunch of other windows, you begin to see that the Rambam might not have meant exactly what he says. And the book that puts this point about the 8th principle of faith together, quoting so many sources, is Mark Shapiro's book, already at least 10 years old or more, The Limits of Orthodox Theology, Maimonides' 13 Principles Reappraised, where he goes through each of the Yud Gimel, these foundational principles, and begins to show you that not all the Rishonim, all the Achronim, not everyone accepted these as the Rambam did, even though within the mentality of many people, that is it. But each one of them, literally each one of them, had serious arguments against it by other great people. So while it's maybe become accepted in certain circles and ideas, it was not all the time. And therefore, this would clearly allow, and Rabbi Berman comes up with his own arguments of explaining Maimonides' concept of Torah min hashamayim. And therefore, we are left literally with the anxiety of what to do with this. So it is out there. It is used. Many modern Orthodox people and many underground Orthodox people are looking for ways to figure out how to deal with this issue. And clearly, it's like the genie's out of the box. It's not going away. You could ignore it, okay, but ignoring it and not standing up to actually defend what I hope we all believe, and I love this phrase I use all the time, we are a people of faith. We believe Torah Hashem to be Torah Tamimah. God's Torah is perfect. And if it is, then let's figure out a way to deal with this issue and live in the moment of anxiety. And not every question is answered. I will never forget, and give me one more minute, many, many years ago, hearing a great story of Rabbi Akiva Eger, the great posek of the early 1800s, who one day, the story goes, was asked by his student that he was learning a particular text of the Talmud. He studied the Tosfos, and the Tosfot ended with V'tzarech iyun. Question was asked, it was never answered. So the student went to Akiva and said, what happened here? Tosfos asked the question. He didn't answer it. So Akiva Eger turned to him and said, did he go on to write the next one? Of course he did. There's another Tosfos follows on the next issue. So Akiva Eger, basically to say it in Yiddish, from Akasha start man nicht. If you have a question, so what? You want to find an answer, go for it. Otherwise, struggle with it. And I think in that struggle, we will discover new ways to understand Torah deeper and really have a deeper appreciation for it. So I'll stop here. I apologize for going over time. I'll stay on a few more seconds if someone has questions. Let's hope that we will find an answer to this, and someone else will find an answer to all the other issues that are so much more serious in the Jewish world today than Bible criticism. So thank you for coming on this journey, and any questions?
Thank you, Rabbi. It was fascinating, and we're looking forward for your next series.
Okay, we'll figure out. If anyone has suggestions, you can email me or send a message to Beth Jacob. And again, Arik, thank you so much for doing the intro, and I thank Rabbi Posey and Rabbi Top for the Achsanya Shel Torah that Beth Jacob is, and you guys have the best programming across the world. So, want to know anything interesting? It's Beth Jacob that has the speaker and everything else. Anybody else? If not,
I think a
Rabbi,
couple of weeks ago there was a Rashi where I forgot exactly what near the end of the parsha where Rashi says Aini Odea. I don't know why it's mentioning what it is.
yes. When the pasuk spoke of retelling again that Rivka is Aim Yaakov and Esav.
Yeah, so that was one thing. But one thing, the whole basis of a lot of this, I mean, don't we have I forgot who Hashem was talking to. He says, I never revealed myself with the name Kel Shaddai, or only the name Kel Shaddai. I revealed myself to the Avos. And it's very clear. And when you see the dialogue of Bilam and Balak, Bilam is saying, well, I'm going to speak to Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, and God speaks to him as Elokim.
Vaikar Elokim El Bilam.
So,
yes.
I mean, you have a whole bunch of things, and I tried to map the Yud-Ke Vav-Ke and the Elokim all the time, and I can't succeed in doing it. And I suspect there is no unified. You can't do it as algebra. You can't do substitution, because sometimes I think Elokim is a God of justice, sometimes a God of nature, sometimes a God of power. Like, how do you map that? I can't do it, but again, I'm not a scholar, so I'm a smorgasbord guy, not a gourmet cook. So
Henry, you're okay. Don't worry about it. So let me go back to your first point. The Rashi that says, I don't know, and any of that. Rashi in his commentary to Chumash uses that phrase close to 20 times. In the Gemara, Rashi uses it over 70 times. Rashi was extremely humble. If I come across something I don't know and I have to speak, I skip over it. I'm not about to, especially if I'm writing a book, we're not going to tell you I don't know about it. I just will gloss over it. Now, with that particular Rashi, I should tell you that is not Rashi. Those words were not written by Rashi. Those words written by his student who edited his work, Rabbeinu Shmaya. In the manuscripts to Rashi, which are the good manuscripts, before the editors who print it, where they leave out these little things they had no idea what to do with it, they dropped the letter. There was a shin, and some of them had a shin mem, and a strichel, as they called it, on top, which meant Rabbeinu Shmaya added this. A great scholar by Avram Grossman, who recently was nifter Zichrono Livracha, wrote an article years ago, Hosafot Barashi, the additions to Rashi, where he found, just going through manuscripts, the Leipzig manuscript is written 40 years after Rashi passed away. And in that manuscript, you can see so much more of these additions. Now, Rashi did say, I don't know, in many places, but not in that particular place. One way where many scholars have tried to disprove Bible criticism is exactly where you mentioned, when Hashem reveals himself to Moshe with the Yud-Ke Vav-Ke and the famous Eya Asher Eya, which in its simplicity implies that the Avot did not know the Yud-Ke Vav-Ke at all. Okay, they knew Kel Shakai, but in Torah you do find that name. So how that works out, the Rishonim clearly have issues with it and figure out. But in arguments, Bible criticism, that was one of the arguments of many interesting people said, wait a second, you're ignoring a particular idea here where clearly that name might not have been known to them. But when Torah is written by Moshe, that name is known and revealed. Therefore, when we retell those stories, we have the Yud Kei Vav Kei in there. And a whole long, I mean, there's a whole, we can talk about that for an hour. But Henry, I'll give you a challenge, which is see who's talking and who's talking to whom, and see if the following works. If in a Jewish environment, I'll just give you this for the entire Tanakh, it's always the Yud Kei Vav Kei. If it involves non-Jews or non-Jews are speaking, it's hardly ever, I don't think ever,
Yud Kei Vav Kei.
Yud Kei Vav Kei.
Yeah.
Just try that.
I have that. I have that one, but it's
Okay.
still not 100%.
Okay. Well, listen, Midat Hadin and Midat Harachamim will also get confused.
Yeah.
And the Rishonim will then argue, wait a second, they're supposed to be Midat Hadin, where's the Rachamim, and vice versa. Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Rabbi, I have a quick question, just a throwback from either last week's year or 2 weeks ago here. So given that there's precedence for the 8 psukim in the Talmud, at least there's one opinion that says that the 8 psukim were written by Yoshua. Why do you think that there was such pushback against the 12 by the Ibn Ezra? Meaning, why couldn't somebody just see it as a quantitative jump rather than a qualitatively different?
Okay. Very simply, because they thought, this is my feeling. Actually, if you have a Rambam in front of you, if you go to the Rambam's Hilchot Tfilah, you have a Mishneh Torah available, go to the Rambam's Hilchot Tfilah, go to Parak Yud Gimel, I believe it's Halacha Vav, where the Rambam quotes a Tosefta from Masechet Menachot, and this machloket of the last 8 psukim is found in the Gemara 3 times. Bava Batra Tet Vav Amud Aleph also has it, but this Braita is in Menachot. There it says that the last 8 psukim in Torah, namely the 8, Yachid, an individual can read them. The Rambam understands Hayachid Koreh to mean that you can read those last 8 psukim even without a minyan. In the Mishneh Torah, the great Ravad, or Yeshiva language, the great Ravid screams right there for whatever point of view is. Now, the Rambam there says, Afal Pi, or something like that, that even those last 8 psukim are Mipi Moshe, when you read them in shul, you don't have to have a minyan. The Ravid says it means something else, that you don't have a chazan that reads along whatever. The guy can read it himself, not the person who seems to be reading. A whole machloket Rishonim what that means. But be that as it may, some of the Achronim look at that as a way of saying that even a Rambam, who has to have Torah by Moshe, is saying that the Kedusha of this part, these last 8 psukim, is very different. And even Rav Soloveitchik, in the Nefesh Harav of Rav Shechter, if you go literally to the end, the last pages of the Nefesh Harav, page Shin Chaf Aleph roughly, where he speaks about Simchat Torah, he actually quotes Rabbi Soloveitchik as saying that according to the Rambam, the Kedusha of these 8 psukim is less than the rest of Torah. So wait a second. So it's those types of things that seem to lessen the impact of the 8th. But to answer your question, I think they were afraid. If you say, oh, 8 is 12, wait a second. It's like Rabbeinu Bachya reacted right there in Varim to the beginning of Parak Lamed Daled. The minute it said, Vayal Moshe, Ibn Ezra said, Ulefi dati mizeh pasuk katav Yeshua b'derech nevuah. Rabbeinu Bachya jumps in and says, no. Disregard all this. It doesn't happen. We believe the entire Torah is Moshe. So I think the veering was, even though many people follow the other opinion, and accepted that the 8 are by Yeshua, that it was just let's keep it this way, because we're afraid people will, it becomes what many people call a slippery slope. Anyway, I think I am over super time, and anybody else has a question, please email me or let me know, or get in touch with me somehow. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. ברכה והצלחה, ונזכה לאור חדש על ציון תאיר.